Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. This is Sumit Parak and today we are going to talk about JSX. What is JSX? JSX is a technique introduced by React.js team which allows you to define HTML inside JavaScript code. This is very popular among React developers because we as a React developer used to create a lot of React application with a lot of UI components in it, and each component would have JSX, right? But before we talk about how JSX works for React application, let's try to understand and go back in time in pre-JSX era when JSX was not there, then how we could update the DOM, right? How we were updating the DOM in a plain vanilla JS application. So I have created a very basic HTML file here with an index.js file which does not have any content here right now, and as you can see it is just rendering other HTML content. Right now, in how many ways we could update the DOM in VanillaJS? So let's try to understand that. So if we want to, let's say, update something like this, so let's create, let's define a hello world with h1 tag, and we just want to replace the DOM of entire document, so we can do it like this. Okay, so basically this way we can overwrite DOM of entire document, entire body. Okay, but what if you want to append DOM to append, let's say, HTML to existing DOM. Okay, so let's say I want to create I want to create a new element at runtime. I want to define some text content in it. Say this is my div element and I want to append it. So in that case I could write it like this. Since this is an HTML node, that's why I'm using this function to append it to the existing body DOM element, right? So this is how you could add HTML to an existing DOM. Now to make it more dynamic, we could possibly, because I want to print a series of numbers from 1 to 10. In that case, let's say we have a loop. Okay, but first let me define a string. So we already have a variable with similar name. Let's name it series. Let's append this here. Now I want to let's create a new element, series section. Now I'm going to assign this series variable to the text content property of series section, and now let's append the same element to the body again. Let's understand what is happening here. Okay, okay, so we are just printing here. We just need to, let's see, I is equals to 0. Oops, my bad. All right. Okay, so but now what if we want to print each number in separate lines, right? Because in this particular case we are assigning these series as a text content, right? But let's add some some HTML to this series. Okay, So in that case we can assign it to series, but this will still print it in a horizontal series. Okay, but let's add a br tag here and see, we can even shorten this a bit. Remove the plus tag, and yeah, this would also work. So this is how, you know, you could update DOM in VanillaJS application when we didn't have JSX, when we didn't have different kind of frameworks and things like that. But now let's talk about JSX. Okay, so this is my React application, and this is how you know, JSX based component look like, where we have a function. We typically have a function which would return a JSX markup. Okay, so you could have multiple functions, like for example you could have another function called foo, which would return, you know, a similar markup. But remember that in React there should be only one exported member of that component. Okay, so in this case, as you can see here, JSX is rendering. Okay, so now what if I want to update its attribute? Okay, so for example, if we in plain vanilla JavaScript we have, you know, attributes like these, like class and tab index. All these are small in small letters, right? But in JSX these attributes are in camel case forms, and sometimes those attributes are having a different name as well. Like for example, in HTML we just saw that there was only a class attribute, there was no class name, just a class. But in JSX this is called class name, right? And which is in camel case. So here you could just, you know, pass this class name like this, and this will be applied to this JSX element here, right? So JSX is cannot be natively rendered in browser. So for example, if you try to render this type of function in a plain vanilla JavaScript based application, it will fail because the browser does not natively understand JSX. You will need some kind of transpiler or compiler to transpile it into, you know, vanilla JavaScript format. But when you use JSX with React, its build system automatically transpiles it and render it in a language which browser understands. So as you can see here we have written class name, but here it is rendered as class. All right. So similarly, you can, you know, define different kind of attributes here, just like you do in VanillaJS applications, right? We'll talk about other components in the same file later on, but this is how you can define attributes. Now, how to define events in JSX? So let's remove this and let's create a form type. Okay, let's define a form, a very basic form, which would have some basic functionality. Okay, so I'm going to give them placeholder, enter first name, and then enter last name, and then I'm going to add a button here, give it a, you could either, you know, add it inside a form tag, or you could, you know, render them inside a div element, does not matter. So let's say I'm going to label it as save. Okay, so this is very simple form where we have two text fields and one button, and we want to on the click of this button, we want to kind of merge the first name and last name and display them as full name in a label. Let's say we have this label and we want to display the full name here, like display the full name here. All right, on the click of save button. Okay, so in React you will have to, so there is a thing called state management in React where we could use some state APIs to store component related business logic or data in a state. So here we are going to use that. So we'll talk about state in detail in future videos. So I'm going to just use that as it is. So I'm going to define states for first name and last name first. So let's have something like this, first name, and this is my set first name. So basically this first name is act as a getter and this act as a setter value, and this basically defines the default value for the first name. Okay, so similarly I'm going to do the same for last name. Alright, this will also have a default empty value, and I'm going to bind this to these two text fields. So basically I'm going to do it like this, and then here it will be last name. Okay, so as I said that this acts as a default value, and we have just binded these two states to these input fields. So if I, let's say, update it, we'll be able to see the default values in these text fields. Okay, let me make it empty again. All right, and on the button click, I want to display both first name and last name under this label. Okay, so for that I will need to implement the on click handler for this button. Okay, in HTML, in VanillaJS, we had to use click handler like this, like on click method, right? And as I said, in JSX it is in camel case mostly, so we can use it like this, where the C is capital. So now you could either define it as this event handler as inline, or you could define an event handler function, let's say on btn click. You can give it whatever name you want, but if you're building a real application, a real project, just try to make sure that you give a very meaningful name to these variables. So let's add a console log here, and these are there is red underline because these are not being used yet. Okay, we'll use them and then these warnings will go away. So let's click this button. So as you can see, as soon as we clicked it, this console log got hit, and we are seeing the event data of this click event here. But if you type this, you will see empty string, because basically currently there is nothing here, because this is trying to pin the value attribute of this button, which it does not have anything yet. Okay, we on the click of this button, we want to display both first name and last name on this label. So how can we do that? So as soon as I type here, so I can't type here anything, so for this I will have to implement on change handler, because in React, if you are binding any state to the value attribute, and if you try to type anything or make any change from browser, it won't make that change until you implement a change handler. Okay, and then update the state value. All right, so on first name change, and then let's implement the same on last name change. Okay, so we have these two change event handlers. So here let me just put a console log first with this value. Okay, let me update these because the syntax was incomplete, that's why we are getting this error. But now once we save this, the error will be gone. Okay, so now let's me try and update this. So as you can see, as soon as I type something, this on change handler is getting invoked and we are seeing the console logs accordingly. Now we want to update this here. Okay, so let's use this here. Let's see what error we get. Okay, so as you can see, now we are able to update the text field properly, but that is still not happening for the second text field because we have to do the same for last name as well. And now these two warnings are gone. Okay, and see, now we are able to detect changes in these two text fields, and we are also updating them to their respective states accordingly. Now we just need to update and complete the button click part. Okay, so here let's try to first log these two. Okay, and let's see if it is able to log the correct value here. Yeah, it is. So now let's create, because see, we are able to log it here, but we need to somehow let React know that we have to render both these values within this label, right? So we can either do it like this, okay, what is this one here? A form label must be associated with an input. Okay, sorry, it has to be HTML4. Okay, so let's keep it empty for now to remove the warning. We don't need this here. So as we can see, we can either do it like this, but if you want to do it on a button click, you will have to create a new state with the name, with the full name state, and then you give it empty string first, and then you can define it like this. The best way would be to use template literals. So let's the name is updated, so you can also make it a template literal like this. And this will still work and the warning will be gone. Alright, so this is how you could define different kind of attributes, defined event handlings, and so on. So basically this HTML4, I mean in plain HTML it was a different kind of attribute which I don't remember right now, but yeah, so you could also define all these attributes in JSX like this. Just understand that these are in camel case format in JSX. Okay. Now, so this is how we were able to define, HTML inside our JavaScript. Now, what if I want to, let's try to extend this component a bit. Let's try to add h1 tag here. But as I added another HTML element here, I'm getting error. It says that adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Did you want a JSX fragment? So basically, if you're writing JSX based component, you need to make sure that your JSX must be wrapped in a parent element. It could either be any HTML tag, or it can also be an empty tag, which is also called as JSX fragment. So this is a JSX fragment. So since we wrote two adjacent HTML tags like this, it was giving error, but as soon as we wrapped it in a parent tag, the error was gone. Okay, so you can either define that fragment like this, or you can also use an inbuilt fragment tag, fragment component like this, and that will also work. But typically we use this tag like this, without needing to import them, right? It is imported internally by React, so we don't need to import it and use it like that. But that's an alternative. Okay, so this is how you can wrap multiple HTML tags in a parent element in JSX file. All right, so in this particular case, we defined JSX in a single function, but you could also define JSX either as expression or in another function, and then reuse that in any other function. So for example, let's say I'm going to define a variable and assign it with the JSX. Okay, so this is not a function, this is just a variable, and here I have defined another component which just returns the JSX syntax. Okay, so and I can reuse that in my another React component like this. So basically, if you want to, if you have defined JSX in a function, you can call it like this, like a regular HTML tag. But if you have defined JSX as a variable, you need to render it as a variable, right? Something like this. And this is how you can reuse many part of your React application. You can break down a complex JSX into reusable and smaller ones, and then use it like this. Okay, now what if you want to dynamically inject HTML in any JSX code? So in this particular case, we have created a very basic form with first name and last name and this particular button. Let me create another file here. Let's name it JSX. Let's call it template. Okay, and I'm going to, so basically you can either create an arrow function, or you can either define a regular function like this, and then you return a JSX. Okay, now for example, I have an HTML string and I want to assign that HTML string. I want to render that HTML string within the JSX. Okay, so this is basically rendering a raw HTML string is not recommended for production. Of course, you should always sanitize it, but I'm just going to explain how to do it in JSX. Okay, so let's say I have this JSX, I have this HTML in the string, and I'm going to I want to render it basically in this div element, right? So I can use a property called dangerously set inner HTML. As you can see by the name, right? Setting up raw HTML to JSX is definitely not recommended for production. I'm just sharing it for knowledge purpose. If needed, if it's still needed, make sure you sanitize the raw HTML first. So there is an underscore HTML property where you can pass the raw string, and let me format this. Let me import this in my app.jsx file, because app.jsx is the entry point of React application. So let me just import template tag here. Let me render it like this. Let's see. So as you can see, this is how we could render any raw HTML, raw string based HTML in any JSX syntax, right? But this is definitely not recommended. All right, now so we saw so far how to use JSX in React based application, and how we were updating DOM in a pre-JSX era, right? But let's also try to understand that if you have a VanillaJS application, existing VanillaJS application, and you want to incorporate JSX into that, right? You want to gradually migrate that to use JSX and React. How would you do that? So first, let me create a new folder here, Vanilla JSX. Let me initialize npm. I'm going to move my existing HTML and JS files to this directory. Okay. Assuming that this is your existing VanillaJS application and you want to start using JSX in it. Okay. So let's first build. So for example, I'm defining some React specific placeholder here. This is where a React specific component will render, and this is your VanillaJS, your existing VanillaJS application will render. Okay, so let me make some minor changes. All right, so okay, so let me change this. So if I try to, so as I explained previously, I mean, you could assign JSX to any variable as well, or you could define a function with that. Let's try to do the same with VanillaJS application and see what it does. Okay, so we have defined this JSX variable here, and let me try to update it like this, and let's see what happens. Okay, let me try to run this. Okay, all right, so let's see if there is any console error. So yeah, so we are getting this console error here because as I said, browser cannot natively interpret or understand JSX syntax. If you want to use JSX, you need to use any transpiler which transpiles it into JavaScript, a valid JavaScript syntax which the browser understands. So in this particular case, we are going to use Babel. Okay, so let me install some Babel dependencies. Right, Babel core, Babel CLI, and since JSX is a React JS standard, so we are going to also install React preset. Okay, so let's install this, and I have installed them as a dev dependency because we only want to use them, you know, while building the application. We don't want to use them in production. So now we have these dependencies, and now we need to transpile this. Okay, so this is our let's assume that this index.js is the entry point of our application. Let's add a script here. Okay, okay, so let's run this now. Okay, we will parser. Okay, oh, so missing plugin JSX flow TypeScript. So we're getting some error. This is okay, currently enabled. Oh, okay, so basically we have installed Babel dependencies, we have added script. We also need to enable the React preset plugin for the Babel, so we do that from here. We are defining presets array where we are explicitly enabling React preset. So basically this .babelrc file is what Babel by default validates and understand. So now we should possibly be good with the command. Yeah, this has worked, and now as you can see, we were able to compile the index.js JS file into this file which does not have JSX. Basically this has converted that JSX into this particular syntax. So this syntax was being used in very older React versions when JSX was not introduced, right? So this is how you could also create React application, right? If you're not using JSX, then you can still create React components like this. Okay, but of course we'll still get some errors. Index.js is no longer an entry point because browser cannot directly understand this JSX syntax. So let's point out our script to the dist folder script. So I'm going to change that, and now we are getting this error that React is not defined. So we possibly need to install React as well, React and React DOM. And just for your knowledge, that React 19 no longer bundle React.js as UMD bundle. So UMD bundle is a universal bundle which allows you to use React either in browser or in server or in any other environment which supports JavaScript. Okay, React 19 no longer does that. So for the time being we will use React 18. Of course there are, I mean, if you are using React 19, you can use some ESM bundles of React and you will be able to do the same thing with React 19 as well. So I have installed React 19, and then let me inject React dependencies here. I'm going to use a production one. See, now the console error is gone, but it is rendering that JSX as an object, right? So what does that mean? So let's try to console log that. Okay, let's recompile this one and see. So basically this JSX is being transferred into a JSON object which looks like this, and when we try to append this into the DOM, it renders like this, which is obvious. Okay, so since this is the data structure that only JSX, that only React understands, so we need to, if we want to render it to the DOM, we need to use React DOM API. Okay, so we have also installed React DOM API, React DOM package, so we need to inject that as well here. And in our index.js file, let's use this method. React DOM.render method is used to inject any JSX into any DOM element, render any JSX into any DOM element. So we have already defined a React placeholder, so let's use that. So let's remove this one now. Let's recompile this, and yeah, and now we are able to use JSX in our existing VanillaJS application. Of course, I mean, this is, you can also call it a React application, but we have integrated React in a very different way than what it looks like in a traditional React application, right? So in this particular case, as I initially said, you already have your application in VanillaJS or in any other framework maybe, and you want to start using React gradually. This is how you could possibly do that. Of course, there are other ways as well. You can also create web components and other things as well, but for this video I just wanted to explain and talk about JSX. This is how you could integrate JSX in any existing VanillaJS application. So yeah, I hope you understood what JSX is, and I hope I was able to explain it better to you. And if you like this video, please like it and subscribe it and share with your friends. Thank you so much.